I'll make my entire argument now. If Your Honor, please, based on earlier rulings of the court, I was not going to mention anything about the role of the court or the rules of criminal procedure or the law at all. I was going to get right into the facts, but the General chose to talk about this court's role and all of that. Just very briefly, we've briefed that. But the rules of criminal procedure say that for a case to be bound over, that the court must find that an offense was committed, albeit by probable cause, and the defendant committed it. So we know that this is Andrew Delke, but the law court must find, even by preponderance of the elements, all the elements of the offense exist, that an offense was committed. We suggest that it was not, therefore the court should dismiss the case. Obviously, the government can do whatever they want and go to the grand jury and whatever vindication they want. But we're here and the court's making its decision. We appreciate the court's rulings. The bottom line is that it must be an unlawful killing. If a killing is done in self-defense or pursuant to the police statute, it's not unlawful. The burden is on the state to prove that, not the defense. Even if the proof is equally balanced, we still must prevail the defense because the burden is on the state. So even by a probable cause standard, I suggest that that statute, the use of force statute. But where did that statute come from? It was United States Supreme Court decision. It dealt with a fleeing felon, and it dealt with Tennessee law. And that was the ruling of the Supreme Court of the United States, and it was passed in front of the Sentencing Commission of the state of Tennessee. And a predecessor of this court, Judge Barbara Haynes, chaired that commission. It was my honor to serve as the chair of the penal subcommittee which wrote that statute. And that statute says that a police officer has privileges that we as ordinary citizens do not enjoy. We must retreat sometimes if we're using self-defense. Police officers don't have that choice. The duty of them is to charge towards danger. And because they must enforce the law and move toward danger, they are clothed with a special statute which gives them the authority not to sit in that chair if they act according to probable cause that they believe that there's a danger to themselves and others and that deadly force is necessary. And that statute was complied with here by Officer Delke. The statute requires, 1, that he be in lawful performance of his duty. He was. That his identity be known to the person. He was in full uniform. He was. The statute compels that the officer, if possible, to give notice that that the person should stop and not continue to run away. And the statute compels that the officer must give notice that deadly force would be used if flight does not cease. 3 times he said, drop the gun. Well, first he said before the gun was even produced, he said, stop, stop. I'll get to that in a minute. But 3 times he said, drop the gun. Drop the gun. And then he squared off. And he said, drop the gun or I will shoot. And it was now or never. And Mr. Habrick turns. As we saw in the autopsy pictures, he turns. There's a backstop of a brick wall behind, and Officer Delke fires 4 times, hitting Mr. Habrick, 3 times, 1 bullet going into the brick wall. And Habrick drops. And the firing ceases because the threat stopped. Officer Delke then moves into a position of cover, as he's trained to do, and waits for Officer Tolbert to come. Mr. Habrick, he doesn't know if he's alive or dead, but he knows there's a gun under him. He knows there's a gun. You heard the tape. Tolbert shows up, he flips him over, handcuffs him, and the gun is where? That gun. in his left hand. It's no longer like this, or like this, or like that. Judge, it's like this. And Tolbert, to his credit, says, I don't know, Mr. Raybin, if his finger was in the trigger or if it was like this. I can't tell you, but it was like this. And I had to pry the gun out of his hand. That's how tightly it was being held. And so, as this officer testified in the training, and we saw in the videos, and we saw in the autopsy report, and from the doctor himself, how long does it take to have the gun in this position? I won't point it out anymore. Assume this is a weapon. To turn with it like so, and to fire on the pursuing officer. A heartbeat. A heartbeat. That's all it takes. And that's the position he was in when he was shot. You've heard the reaction. Even though the officer is ready to fire, if he moves before he does, he's a dead man. He said in his statement, and I'm glad they played his statement, I thought he was going to kill me. I thought he was going to kill me. I gave him every opportunity to drop the weapon. That's the unrefuted proof. Why did he do that? His training dictated it. His role as a human being dictated it. He said, I gave him every opportunity. It was his choice to drop the gun, and then after that I had no choice. So we talk about choices here. That's the facts. And under the statute that the Supreme Court gave us, and it was enacted in the legislature and passed into law and governs this officer's behavior, he did not violate the law. He did not act unlawfully. They may not like the statute, and maybe they can go and change it or do whatever they want, but that's the law that governs this case. The issues here, Your Honor, is that Officer Delke followed his training, he followed the law, and upheld his oath to protect and serve the citizens. The issues here are not only what happened, but why. And we greatly appreciate that Your Honor directed the state to produce all the rest of the videos, because until we could see Mr. Habrick acting in concert with these other two men, it was not totally apparent to us what was going on. It is now. The facts are that Mr. Habrick was driving his vehicle in an erratic fashion, causing it to be brought to the attention of not only Officer Delke, but several other officers as well. That's why we played the tape. You heard the first officer on the tape wasn't even Delke. It was someone else saying, he's running from us. But most importantly, while we go through these facts, think of things not only from Delke's perspective, from Habrick's perspective, because he had a choice too. And as I'll tell you, everything Officer Delke did was a direct response to what Habrick did. And I don't care that there's 200 or 300 other warrants flying around. I've never seen a case like this in 40 years because of Mr. Habrick and his two other individuals did something virtually unprecedented. The Habrick and his friends knew the police were after him. By any definition, once they got to the Henry Hale apartments, they knew they were after him. The officers had abundant probable cause. This squad, they're not responding to reports of mailboxes being knocked down or people breaking into tool sheds. They're actively and aggressing to get the guns off our streets. The anti-gun policy is now in place by the district attorney, appropriately so, and the police to protect us. But these gun cases just don't magically appear here in court. Our officers are out there to apprehend those, and that's why we have a special squad. We have officers out there to apprehend who have illegal guns and who are unauthorized persons. You heard Lieutenant Whitey cross-examined about the fact that the secondary police channel is not recorded. There are many police sub-channels for special units, and officers even have cell phones. That the city chooses not to record these is not nefarious, and it's certainly not attributable to Mr. Habrick. I find it astounding that the state didn't play that tape as part of their case, and we had to because it was extremely revealing. You could hear the tenor of this officer's voice when he saw that gun. You could hear the professional way these officers were reacting. He's not some rogue cop running amok on the street. He's a professional. You heard his voice in conjunction with the other officers. Now, Officer Delke lost Habrick's vehicle, but it might have gone into Henry Hale. This thing about the white car, I don't know that they pressed it anymore. They put it in the warrant as if it was some big deal. It's not. Maybe they're saying that he was in the apartment complex and had the wrong car. He made a mistake as to which car he was after, but it doesn't matter. The point is he was investigating to find out which people were in the car. Now, remember, officer never touched Mr. Habrick while he was running after him. He just told him to stop so he could speak to him and ask questions to see if he was involved with his car. Habrick gave every indication of suspicious activity. All I'll get to that goes to Habrick's intent. It was during that situation that Habrick produces the gun, which changes the dynamics of this case 1,000-fold. That once that happens, we're way past a white car, and we're now in the land of felony arrests and potential assaults against police officers. Reasonable suspicion is mushroomed into probable cause and a duty to arrest. If you look at it that way, their white car thing is just bogus. This courtroom's not the place for that issue. Now, the state talks about distances. I don't know what the prosecutor's going to say when I sit down, but he's going to talk about distances. And the TBI agent said, Delke's statement is somehow inconsistent with the facts. Delke said, I wasn't good with the distances. That's understandable. But, Your Honor, if distances were important, Chief Anderson would require his officers to carry rulers and tape measures instead of the new body cams, which are fortunately now coming online. I think it's odd that the TBI agent who spent hours and hours measuring everything, he couldn't tell us how many bullets Habrick had in his gun. There's only one number, and one number only, that's important in this case. And that's the number of seconds it took Delke to dismount from his vehicle to the time of the shooting. And if you look at the time on the videos, it's 40 seconds. It's 2:38 to 3:06, 40 seconds. Multiply that by 4 frames a second, and that's only 160 images we have. But of course, you have to eliminate that from the zone where you don't have anything. Now let's talk about the critical issue that the state talks about in the TBI agent's testimony. And I'd said to Mr. Brown, well, let me deal with that on closing argument. This is a big issue in the case, and we may hear about it when the DA argues. And here it comes. They said this man is somehow guilty of some crime because Habrick supposedly fully turned towards Delke, who's over here. Mr. Habrick fully turned and pointed the weapon at Mr. Delke. And there wasn't enough time for all of that to happen, according to them. And they're trying to make this out like this is some duel on a street in the Wild West where both people are standing there looking at each other armed with guns. It's not. It's not that way. All you need to be killed as a police officer is the weapon in a hand, this way, that way. He could have fallen down and held the gun this way or this way. But what is it from Officer Delke's perspective? I'm not going to point this at the court, but you can just imagine that what Delke sees is the business end of the gun, whether it's this way or that way, and he sees the head turn and he sees the weapon, and that's all he sees. But never, never, in 200 pages of testimony, did Officer Delke ever say, why he turned and he pointed the gun at me? And that's what they want you to believe. What did Officer Delke say? I'll read it. It's only 6 lines. I'm not 100% sure, but all I'm certain of is I saw the gun come out. 100% identified it as a gun. Nothing else but a gun, and saw him. I mean, he didn't completely turn around and start walking backwards, but he turned his body toward me. His head turned completely toward me and looked directly at me, and the gun was pointed in my direction at that point. That's what the officer said. And there was plenty of time for that to have happened in that zone that we keep talking about, and that's the proof. Now, how do we know that? Because at that moment in time is when Delke radios, 54, 54, black handgun. He describes the color to let the other officers know. Now I want to talk about Mr. Habrick and his two Confederates, because I think this is where we get down to it, and why this case is not those 200 cases that the general talks about. Remember the video. As the car's driving into Henry Hale, you saw the 7 different angles, 6 different ways. One of the car doors pops open before the vehicle even comes to rest. Who opens a door and bails out like that? Only somebody who wants to separate themselves from the car as quickly as they can. The car comes to rest and 2 occupants get out, and then Mr. Habrick bolts away. Please remember that from the video, that when that car stops before Delke's even there, the first man gets out, tall man, occupant 1, and walks. The second man walks out with the bag, and he comes out, and you remember seeing that thing where he takes that bag and he picks it up, and it's got some heft to it, and he puts it over his shoulder. Sure, that bag of work clothes was real heavy, but it was heavy because he got some heft on it. And Habrick runs. Delke's not even there. He runs as fast as he can, Habrick does, to the alcove in the apartment where these other 2 men are headed. It is obvious that these 3 men want to distance themselves from the car as quickly as they can. Why? Because they know the police are after them. They want to get away and distance themselves and disappear into the community. The first occupant just walks out, and then the second one is walking along trying to make himself invisible. And Habrick runs, not just running, but wildly running, calling attention to himself. The guilty flee where no man pursues. We've all heard that, and this is a prime example of it right here on the screen for you to see. Now, Delke pulls in, the man with the backpack keeps walking gently away, and then Habrick does 180 and runs in the opposite direction with Officer Delke in hot pursuit. You'll notice that everybody in the complex is watching this, but who is not watching? Whose eyeballs are not on Mr. Habrick and Officer Delke? Why, it's the man with the backpack, trying to be invisible as he walks around the corner, not knowing if the other police are after him or not. He bolts and runs as fast as he can, and runs and runs and runs, and hides the backpack in the other part of the complex across the way, and hides it behind a fence. We've all seen that. If that's not evidence of criminality, I don't know what is. Direct and circumstantial evidence is not only the province of the prosecution, the defense can rely on it as well. Reasonable inferences from the evidence show that the man in the middle was, I suggest, the leader of this band of 3. He risks nothing. He sent the man with the backpack off, I suppose, to hide the goods, and Delke and Habrick to run in the other direction to distract the police. He's like a director in the orchestra, conductor in the orchestra. He's not making a sound, but he's directing everything. He's functioning like a quarterback, and he has got literally 2 men in motion. He's got Delke running here to draw the officer's fire, figuratively, and he's got the Mr. Backpack running in the other way. Don't you think they knew this? Don't you think they practiced this? Don't you think this is something that was going on and ready to go, a plan in case the police got him? There must have been something awful precious in that backpack. But 2 runners in motion trying to get the bag across the goal line and distract the police by having the other person go running in the opposite way. And that's what this case is about. Habrick was a decoy. He was not only a decoy, but, Judge, he was a sacrifice. These other two men sacrificed Mr. Habrick, knowing full well he was being pursued by an armed Metro Police officer. If there's responsibility here, it lies not only at the feet of Mr. Habrick, but also at the feet of these other two men who were part of this enterprise. And let's point the fingers where they need to be pointed, and not at this good police officer who's responding to exactly, and I mean exactly, Judge, what Mr. Habrick was doing intentionally and purposefully. Look what the man did who's the orchestra leader. He goes back to the white car and takes stuff out. What did he remove? We don't know. The TBI agent says, well, I don't know. What was in the backpack? Well, we don't know. The TBI has done nothing, in my knowledge, about any of this. That's the key to the case. We didn't know that until Your Honor let us see the videos. And now we get down to Habrick. What was he doing? He was attracting attention to himself every possible way that he could. He would have been a poster child for the training academy of what to do to see somebody acting this way, that you're going to run after him. He was grabbing at his waist, he was shooting up flares, he was throwing his arms and legs out in wild attraction and movement. It was like he had a big sign over his head saying, chase me, follow me. And that's what this case was about. Because Officer Delke is after the guns, he sees Habrick reaching his waist, and he runs to the man with the gun. Now, did Officer Delke know about this little plan and all of this stuff? He went after the man who was attracting attention big time. Habrick was doing exactly what Habrick wanted to do. The DA said, oh, he's running for his life. No, he's not. He's running to convince this man to follow me so Mr. Orchestra Leader can get whatever's contraband out of the car you can, and Mr. Bagman can get away with the goods. That's what was going on in this case. And that's why Habrick acted this way. Who in the world runs from the police like this? What you saw. Delke does everything in direct response to Habrick. It's purposeful, it's direct, and designed to attract attention to himself. They had this plan cooked up. How can this officer be forced to sit in this chair charged with homicide when he's reacting to doing what Habrick goaded him into doing? He forced the issue. He provoked this man. Habrick's role was designed figuratively to draw this officer's fire. And Judge, as it turned out, it turned to a literal fire. And that's the truth of this case. We're not about white cars or different cars. We're in Mr. Habrick provoking an armed police officer to attract attention. And we know what happens next, because this changes. It's a chase. This man has his weapon in his holster. If he's this crazy rogue police officer that the district attorney believes, he had plenty of chance to shoot him in the back or whatever as he's running along over there and he's all alone. He didn't. The weapon's holstered. And all he's doing is saying, stop, stop. And that weapon is holster safe. No deadly force. We're just going after what all these other warrants are about. But Habrick falls. And that's a critical moment in time. Probably unanticipated. And he's running so fast, he slides into home base. And that's why I asked the doctor so much about all these injuries to the arms and legs. And I ask Your Honor to look at those pictures when you're deciding this case. That was a huge fall because he's running, and he's running as fast as he can. And out pops the cell phone. And the cell phone goes under the car. We suggest, if you look at the videos, Habrick may have said, I'm going to get rid of this cell phone. It's popped out, and under the car it goes. And where did the cell phone is? Oh, it ended up in a dumpster. Okay. Maybe I believe that like the work clothes. Cell phone's gone. But if he got rid of the cell phone, Judge, he could have gotten rid of the gun. He had plenty of time to do it. If you've got this cell phone, it's got evidence on it of whatever they're doing. Pitch it under there. If this gun is hot or whatever, pitch it under there, and then he's got nothing. And then if Habrick gets arrested, There's nothing on him at all. But he doesn't do that. And as he runs around the corner, he takes this weapon like this, and he runs around. You can see it. It's in the picture. It's in front of your eyes. And whether he's running like this, or he's running like that, or he's running this way, and he's looking around behind him, Delke's behind him. Your Honor, when the court decides this, please, please look at the case from the eyes of this man from behind and not from the 360 or the whatever we're looking from the side. He's behind him. He's looking straight ahead at the danger in front of him. But then, and that's a critical point. It's how did it all seem to the officer? But now Delke comes around and it turned into a simple foot pursuit. He's hollering for him to stop. He's looking down the business end of the gun. And Delke has, as he testifies, tunnel vision. He looks at the business end of the gun, and it's this big, because now he's in mortal danger. Whether it's in his right hand or his left hand, or he's turning or whatever, he sees this. And what is his training? What is his training? Tell him. That is, he's in mortal danger, and he needs to make a whole different situation that Habrick himself precipitated. Purposefully or unpurposefully, I don't care whether the gun fell out and Habrick picked it up and did like that run. Maybe that's what happened. But Habrick did that and created the situation purposefully. He could have stopped and thrown the gun on the ground. He didn't do it. And as I said, Delke's yelling, 54, 54, black handgun. He's close enough to describe it. And now all of a sudden we got an armed suspect. And then he calls for backup. You've heard the targeting glances. We've been through that. Why does he keep on running? Because his duty is to run into danger when the rest of us would run away. It doesn't matter. And so he fires. But he says, I'll drop the gun, or I'll shoot. And he shoots. The backup officer approaches Habrick and finds the gun clenched. What other choice did he have? Let him run away? The statute gives him the authority to protect others himself. And if he didn't have to, he didn't want to, he said it gave me no choice. He's out there exposed. Tasers won't work, pepper spray won't work. I suggest the government is not proven even by probable cause. Now, you remember I said Habrick fled before Delke got there? And the guilty flees where no man pursues. And that phrase comes from Proverbs 28. And the rest of this phrase says that the guilty flee where no one pursues, but the righteous are as bold as a lion. The righteous sits over here. That's the man that put his life on the line, the first responder, who goes into this community to protect people. That's the man whose record performance is exemplary, who's picked for this special squad. The man who had 900 hours of training. He's a fine police officer that followed his training. And now he finds him sitting here in a chair charged with homicide because he was reacting directly all of the things that Habrick did to provoke him. That's the facts. I don't care what some other officer did in some other traffic stop. We're here about this case. Habrick was drawing the officer's fire figuratively and literally. And Habrick was protecting these two other men and acting as their decoy. And it cost him his life. Habrick had the gun, and now the question we ask is, was he prepared to use it? Certainly Officer Delke thought so, and that's all the court need find. There's a probable cause to believe that. Your Honor has allowed evidence of the first aggression rule. I suggest Habrick pulled his gun first. Delke responded. The first aggressor here was Habrick. The prior assault of behavior includes robberies on 3 citizens of this community, and throwing a stapler and hitting a girl in the face. And if he can do that, he can shoot an officer now that he's armed with a gun instead of a stapler. Now let's suppose, and I'm almost done, let's suppose Officer Delke didn't fire. The general talks about what might have been, what he could have done, what he should have done. Let's talk about another hypothetical set of facts. Let's suppose Officer Delke didn't fire. Officer Tolbert is coming in his car, and Tolbert dismounts and runs right into Habrick, who's got a gun and running face-to-face with that officer and others. Now Habrick is face-to-face with Tolbert and shoots and kills Tolbert. And Habrick comes to trial, and Delke is the first witness and tells everybody what happened. And everybody says to this man in court for the rest of his life, "My God, man, why didn't you shoot him when you had the chance?" Officer Tolbert be alive today. I conclude with as follows. From the words of the Supreme Court of the United States, that is the author and origin of the statute that we're here today. The reasonableness of a particular use of force must be judged from the perspective of a reasonable officer on the scene, rather than with a 20/20 hindsight. The calculus of reasonableness must embody allowance for the fact that police officers are often forced to make split-second decisions in circumstances that are tense, uncertain, and rapidly evolving about the amount of force that is necessary in a particular situation. We must avoid substituting our personal notions of proper police procedures for instantaneous decisions of an officer at the scene. We must never allow the theoretical, sanitized world of our imagination to replace the dangerous and complex world police officers face every day. What constitutes reasonable action may seem quite different to someone facing an assailant with a gun than to someone analyzing questioning at their leisure. We cannot second guess with 20/20 hindsight. Your Honor, I am not here to defend Officer Andrew Delke. He doesn't need defending. He followed his training, he followed the law, and he is not guilty of any crime. We ask the court to dismiss this case. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Raybin. General?